So welcome back. In today's episode, I'm going to show you probably the most common problem with small two-stroke engines like this, from weed eaters to, well, the little tiller that we're going to repair on the channel today. And this applies to chainsaws, even generators and other four-stroke equipment as well. So I have always preached here on the channel, be a little more self-reliant, be a little more self-sufficient, and learning how to repair small engines, well, that's a huge part of living out here in the country like we do and taking care of things and saving money. For example, my old steel weed eater here, I've had this thing forever. I don't know, 15, 20 years. I'd have to go back and look. It's actually on its, well, third carburetor now if you count the factory one, for example. And the first time I carried this to repair at the steel dealer many, many years ago, they wound up replacing the carburetor. I got the bill back and it was like $125 to $150. This is a long time ago. I was not happy, especially being that back in the day I paid $199 for this weed eater. I'd have just bought a brand new one had I known that. So needless to say, the second time that I started having carburetor issues with this, which was just a few years back, I replaced the carburetor and some of the parts myself for a whopping $18 in a few minutes of my time. That, my friends, is why I like to teach people, work on stuff yourself. So I'm going to tell you some of the most common problems I see with small two-cycle engines, what I typically check, and usually what my repair is to get things back running, and I'm going to show you how to do it on the cheap. All right, so before we dive into this piece of equipment and repair it, at least I certainly hope we're going to get it running, let me tell you about today's sponsor. It's a company called Hypo, and right now I have one of their maintenance kits for this tiller right here. By the way, I purchased this kit with my own money months ago before the company even reached out to me about working together. That steel weed eater that I just repaired, well, quite a few months back, I repaired it with one of their kits. My steel chainsaw a couple years ago, again, I used one of their kits. So when they reached out to work together, I said, absolutely, I'm already using and buying your products anyways. So typically I have found one of their little maintenance kits right here can repair the majority of issues that you're going to have with small equipment. There's just not a whole lot that can go wrong with these engines. They're relatively basic. So in one of these kits, you typically get a carburetor, your most common problem that you're going to have with small equipment, set up, ready to go, new gaskets, new fuel line, another very common problem. Fuel lines do deteriorate, an air filter, something you should always replace. This particular kit comes with some very important parts as well. New spark plug, a new fuel filter, something a lot of people overlook that's inside the tank. Let's get that replaced. And probably the second most common part to go bad, your fuel priming bulb. These tend to dry out and crack. So these two parts right here are typically where your problem's going to be in my experience. So here's the cool part. For example, the carburetor for my steel weed eater runs about $100 right now before labor. Hypo's maintenance kits, I paid a whopping $18 for this one, and they're running a special right now on their website. Links are down in the description, by the way, to where they're doing a $9.90 special. $9.90 on all kinds of maintenance kits, carburetors, chains, gloves, adjustment tools, you name it. So it is so hard to not justify having you a spare carburetor laying around for an important piece of equipment like, say, a chainsaw or something else. Or if you have an old weed eater in the backside of the shop that hasn't never run right and you've been wanting to replace it, well, get on there and see if your piece of equipment happens to be one of their $9.90 carburetors or maintenance kits, and you really don't have much excuse as to not repair that piece of equipment. So things that I like to look at on a small piece of equipment before I go off ordering parts. The little push primer bulb right here, is it cracked? Does it have any issues? Is the rubber good on it? The fuel lines right here, it's not uncommon for those to be cracked and sucking air. You do not need air entering the system other than where it's designed at a vented gas cap. So if I determine that those things appear to be okay, no cracks, no leaking fuel, no sucking air, 9 times out of 10, the problem is going to be in your carburetor. All right, so if you're new to this stuff, don't be scared. There's really not a whole lot to mess up here. Right where all these little hoses were that I was just showing you, well, guess what they run to? Your carburetor right underneath here. So I see that I have one screw there. So there's 4 screws total holding this whole plastic cover on. Let's get those apart. Get this cover off, and you can see we're going to flip the choke into the center position to also get this plastic cover off. Let's go ahead and do this thing a full service with that maintenance kit and see if we can get it running. The other thing I should mention, always drain your old fuel out before you start attempting to do a repair. All right, so here's my old air filter, which was right here. As you can see, it goes in around that area. So we're going to replace that. We're going to get the old spider webs and stuff out of here. All right, so right here's the carburetor. Typically, they always have 2 bolts or 2 screws holding them in. As you can see, there's 2 right here. All right, so we're going to take those out. Pull those 2 fuel lines off that you see. And I do want to make note of like that little clip right here. We're going to make sure we put everything back exactly how we take it off. And a little tip for you. If you're taking something apart like this that you're not comfortable with, snap a quick photo with your phone before removing the last screw so you can kind of reference that picture back on how it was for factory. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that little choke selector switch, and I'm going to remember that this concave washer right here that's purposely bent goes on the outside. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this plate because that just popped right off. And here is our little carburetor. All right, looks a little gummed up, a little nasty. By the way, there is our little cable right here. That's what controls the throttle. That just slips right in here and comes out. And let's pop these fuel hoses off. There's the top, there's the bottom. And y'all, it's that simple. No more fooling around with this. Let's just replace it. We're done. So since our kit comes with new fuel hoses and a new primer bulb, it is so simple to go ahead and replace these things. Just in case there's a crack or an issue with them, this is a wearable part, so let's do that. I like to replace one hose at a time, that way I see right where it's going. This goes right through this hole and it goes to the top side of the primer bulb. Okay, now what I'll actually do is take the factory hose, again, just do one at a time, don't pop them all off so you got to figure out where they're going. Don't forget, snap a picture with your phone. And I'll just go ahead and pre-measure it. Cut me some new line. Feed it right back in up top. And I know the top goes to the top of my primer bulb. This kit also comes with a little fuel filter, which is down in the tank. I'm gonna grab some needle nose, do my best to get that out. We definitely want to replace that. That fuel filter appears to be in pretty rough shape. That could be one of our culprits too, but our little kit comes with all that. Again, I'm going to measure out my fuel line, cut me a new one. Feed that fuel line up through the tank, put it on our new fuel filter, press it back in place. It's pretty much just the fuel hose that seals going through the bottom of the fuel tank. All right, pop out our little primer bulb. It's just got 2 catches on it, very straightforward. Pop our brand new primer bulb in. Grab our new carburetor. We don't have to bust nothing apart. We don't have to clean anything out. We're good. We're gonna put our gasket on. Let's make for sure, you see these holes are important. Let's make sure we have our gasket in the right orientation that the bolts can get through and fuel can make it through that little orifice right there. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and put the gasket on this side. You can see I have the gasket on both sides. Put our plate back on. So we need to go ahead and run the bolts through. This one's a little different than some. No big deal. Because the bolts will kind of hold everything together. Now, by sliding those screws through, our gasket can't go anywhere. And everything's kind of held together. Now we can come up here and put our little throttle cable back in, screw everything back down. I'm going to loosely put these screws in so nothing falls apart. Leave myself a little bit of wiggle room right here, and I'm going to reconnect my fuel lines up on the top and bottom. I'll show all this up close in just a second. It's very straightforward. All right, double check our throttle. That looks good. Double check all of our connections. All right, so there is a full replacement. I mean, what did that take? Just a few minutes. Lastly, we're going to put this little foam air filter in here after I get this spider web out the way. So now our little air filter is where it needs to be. And then the last thing to replace is our spark plug. We'll get to that in just a second. Get this cover back on. There's our spark plug wire. Let's double check, make sure everything looks good there. No cracks, nothing broken. All right, we're gonna slightly tighten down on this. There is crush washers on these, you don't want to go too tight. A lot of times you're dealing with little aluminum heads here that can strip out easy. You just want to snug it up until you feel those crush washers kind of, well, compress down on themselves. Hook our spark plug wire back up, and we're ready to go. Now, some of you are going to say, hey, what about carburetor adjustment? To be perfectly honest with y'all, other than fine-tuning a chainsaw. So in the past, I have found that these carburetors come, well, set up relatively well for basic equipment like this. So you have air fuel adjustments back here, but what you need to ultimately refer to is your manual. It'll tell you wide open RPMs. You can kind of listen to tones of how things sound. You can pay attention to your spark plug, see if things are running lean or rich. We get into a lot of that conversation here, but I am by no means an expert on that stuff. But every piece of equipment is going to be different. For example, I'll use a little tack to tune my chainsaws. They have to go to a certain wide open RPM, and you'll make adjustments for that as well. All right, moment of truth. Let's try this thing out. Let's go ahead and prime it up. Turn this on. Go ahead and set our choke to position 1. And fingers crossed this works. Typically, it does. All right, that was a good sign. Let's move to position 2 on the choke. Okay, we're running. We'll let this warm up for a second before we go to the next position, and we'll see if we can get full throttle and actually use this. Something I haven't been able to pull off before. All right, so far so good. I'm gonna check it for leaks, and let's go put it to some use. All right, so that worked great. It had no problem chewing through this kind of hard packed clay, but most importantly, it stayed running. Let's go try some soft ground and some green grass and see if this little tiller will turn that under. All right, so what do you think about that? Literally a few dollars in a few minutes of our time, we've got a piece of equipment back running that I can use around the property, and that, well, I really only have $18 in since this was given to me. Again, don't hesitate to take free weed eaters, chainsaws, or other pieces of equipment that people are throwing out. Often a simple carburetor change out can get you a piece of equipment back running that, well, you can use around your place. So thanks again, Hypa, for sponsoring today's video. It's been a pleasure working with you. Like I said, I've already been using your parts in the past. They're good, inexpensive parts to get equipment like this back running. And I highly encourage y'all, don't be scared. Take an old piece of equipment. If it's already broken or not running right anyways, what have you got to lose? Get out in the shop, get on a workbench, learn how these things work. It'll really come back and benefit you down the road. We'll catch you on the next video.